On the 8th of September 2022, the course of history took a new turn. As the sun set on Queen Elizabeth II's historic reign, the world looked on as a nation and a family embarked on a new era, the centre of which is one man. He was Prince Charles for all of his 73 years, until, on that rainy autumn day, he became king. After 7 decades, this chapter was all he had been waiting for, but was it all that he expected? The year that followed was his chance to carve out his identity and his place in history. It was a year of mourning, political turbulence, family feuds, and a war in Europe. But it was also a year of celebration, friendship, cooperation, and a look towards how the role of monarchy would evolve in the 21st century. Here we take a look back on King Charles III's defining year, what it meant for him, what it meant for Britain, what it meant for the world, and what it tells us about the future of his reign and the kind of king he is destined to be. Let's start at the beginning. It's Thursday the 8th of September 2022. In London, Britain's new Prime Minister is not yet a week into her premiership, and top of her agenda is to tackle the UK's energy crisis. In Windsor, it's the first day of term for the royal children, George, Charlotte and Louis, attending Lambrook School for the first time since their parents William and Kate moved the family out of the capital. In the Scottish Highlands, the Queen, the then Prince Charles, Camilla and Princess Anne are holidaying on the Balmoral estate. To the outside world, it was business as usual, but at 12:32 p.m, it emerged that all was not well. Buckingham Palace issued a statement to say doctors were concerned for the Queen's health and that Her Majesty was under medical supervision. By 4 p.m, senior members of the royal family, Prince William, Prince Edward, Sophie, Countess of Wessex, and Prince Andrew were flying to Aberdeen, and an hour later they arrived at Balmoral. Then, at precisely 6:30 p.m,
the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon.
Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the longest reigning monarch in British history.
And we are interrupting regular programming to bring you breaking news. It is with deep sadness that Buckingham Palace has announced Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, the longest reigning monarch in Commonwealth history, has died at the age of 96.
It is with great sadness that we interrupt our program to tell you that Queen Elizabeth II has passed away.
The Queen has died. It's the day we knew was inevitable, but had hoped would never come.
And so the reign of Elizabeth II comes to a close after 70 years at the age of 96. Her son Charles is now king.
The transition was seamless. The reign of King Charles III began at the moment of his mother's last breath. We first heard from the king shortly after the news broke. In a written statement, the sense of grief was palpable. The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family, he wrote. Continuing, we mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held. The deep personal loss was evident, but with it, the profound sense of duty held so dearly by his late mother also emerged, and after one night of reprieve, the King's work began in earnest. Together with his Queen Consort, Charles III returned to London the following day. In the first of many firsts, His Majesty met his people outside Buckingham Palace, visibly moved by the crowds that had gathered to pay their respects to the past and usher in the future.
He behaved like a king today. He didn't just go straight in, he came to see
the people.
See the people.
I feel a bit sorry for him. I bet deep down he's really sad, but I think it's nice of him to come and meet the crowd. I think he'll
do a good job. And she'll be proud of him.
It's really inspirational. I think having lost his mum, to come here and just be really stable, I think it's a time of change.
He's ready to embrace new ideas. He's more willing to be a bit more open, I think. I think we're going to see a little bit of change from the monarchy now.
The Buckingham Palace walkabout set the tone for the 12 days of mourning that followed. Though grappling with personal grief, the king never kept behind palace doors for too long. In leading the official mourning period, His Majesty undertook a grueling schedule of meetings, visits, and ceremonial duties. He toured all four corners of the nation as his late mother's coffin made its way from Edinburgh to London, where it lay in state in Westminster Hall. The king and his siblings stood vigil beside the coffin as members of the public filed past to pay their last respects. And then, like in so many aspects of this ancient family, the next generation followed in their example. The Queen's last journey continued to Westminster Abbey for her state funeral, and subsequently to her final resting place in Windsor. The King was there every step of the way. Becoming king was the culmination of a long personal journey for Charles, but it also marked a much anticipated transition in public life. Queen Elizabeth II was widely considered one of the best acquainted world leaders of all time. During her 70-year reign, she hosted more than 100 state visits, carried out countless tours all over the world, met with 13 US presidents, and oversaw 15 prime ministers at home. Over the last year, Charles has begun to scratch the surface of this impressive headcount, though he may not have expected to get off to such a rapid start when it came to Westminster. If the Queen had been a symbol of stability, it was perhaps apt that around the time of her death, British politics fell into a period of unprecedented turbulence. Liz Truss was the 15th and final Prime Minister to form a government in Her late Majesty's name, having met with the monarch at Balmoral just 2 days before her death. Not long after, the King held an audience with his first PM, and could his comments have foreshadowed what was to come for the ill-fated Truss administration?
It's a great pleasure.
Dear, oh dear indeed. Alongside her Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng, the Prime Minister's brash economic policies sent the markets into freefall.
I am a fighter and not a quitter.
She was ousted after just 44 days in office.
Thank you.
Barely a month after first meeting the King, she returned to the palace, as is custom, to hand in her resignation. And next through the revolving political door was her successor, Rishi Sunak. 2 prime ministers in 2 months for the King. But whatever the goings-on at home, as head of state, the British monarch remains a fundamentally global figure, and King Charles is no stranger to the world stage. Some 500 world leaders attended the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II, and around 100 returned to the UK for Charles's coronation. In the days leading up to both events, His Majesty personally received various leaders from the Commonwealth and beyond. He hosted his first state visit when the red carpet was rolled out for the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa at Buckingham Palace in November. And in July 2023, US President Joe Biden, who had been represented at the coronation by his wife Jill and granddaughter Finnegan, was welcomed to Windsor Castle with a royal salute and guard of honour. In March 2023, Charles and Camilla carried out their first official visit overseas as King and Queen, a 3-day trip to Germany that was seen as largely successful. His Majesty won hearts by twice showing off his German language skills and poking fun at the testy Anglo-German football rivalry. Though the royal visit to Germany was a predominantly jolly affair, the King remained sensitive to the bleaker picture across the European landscape. Russia was 196 days into its invasion of Ukraine when Charles took the throne, and now, a year on, the war is showing no sign of slowing down. As king, Charles must distance himself from politics and foreign policy, something that may not come naturally to him after a lifetime as Prince of Wales, making his views known. But he has been able to be active in showing his personal support for the Ukrainian people. In October 2022, he met with refugees in Aberdeen, and the following month he officially opened a new Ukrainian welcome centre in London. As the war neared its one-year mark in February, His Majesty received Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky at Buckingham Palace.
Well, we've all been worried about you and thinking about your country for so long, I can't tell you.
And visited Ukrainian troops taking part in training exercises with British soldiers.
So it's an amazing feeling to be in the presence of His Majesty, and that it is unbelievable that we had this opportunity today. I'm amazed by having the ability to meet His Majesty the King today. His Majesty was asked how we would do, how the training was going. He inquired as to our health. He inquired how the training was going to be used in further actions. But what particularly stood out for myself was that he took a particular interest in the well-being of our families, of our wives, our children.
But of course it shows the support of both the nation and the monarchy towards something that's very, very important for all of us.
On the anniversary of the invasion, the King paid tribute to the truly remarkable courage and resilience of the Ukrainian people in the face of the unnecessary suffering inflicted upon them. He added, "I can only hope the outpouring of solidarity from across the globe may bring not only practical aid, but also strength from the knowledge that together we stand united." It's difficult to reflect on King Charles's first year on the throne without remarking on the ever-present legacy of his late mother. In many ways, Queen Elizabeth made sure to tie up all loose ends of her reign by the time it ended. She appeared on Buckingham Palace balcony for one last time as she attended her Platinum Jubilee celebrations in June 2022. She ensured her wishes were known for Camilla to assume the role of Queen Consort when the time came. And, as we've seen, she even saw in one last Prime Minister just days before she died. But in family life, there remained a great dilemma that proved unsolvable within the Queen's lifetime. He's called Harry. By the time Charles assumed the throne, the feud between his sons was well known and widely documented. Following their controversial withdrawal from royal life and move across the Atlantic, Harry and Meghan had launched several missiles over palace walls, claiming the firm had failed to protect them, made them victims of vicious competition between royal households, and fed them to the bloodthirsty media wolves. And there was more to come. The first blow was Harry and Meghan's Netflix documentary that landed on the streaming site in December.
As far as a lot of the family were concerned, everything that she was being put through, they had been put through as well. So it was almost like a rite of passage. And I said, the difference here is the race element. In this family, sometimes, you're part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And there is a huge level of unconscious bias.
In the face of these claims, the King opted for the age-old royal philosophy of never complain, never explain. The family carried on with business as usual, and despite being painted as cold and distant, were all smiles at the Christmas Carol service hosted by the Princess of Wales. The palace did not comment on the documentary or the allegations made, but just a week later was forced to address another race row that erupted under its roof. Ngozi Fulani, who was at the time chief executive of domestic abuse charity Sister Space, had attended a reception hosted by the Queen Consort at Buckingham Palace the month before. It was there that she met Lady Susan Hussey, a lady-in-waiting to the late Queen and godmother to Prince William.
She demanded to know where I was from. No, really where I was from. No, where I was really from. And no matter how many times I answered her, it wasn't the response she wanted. It can't be that you invite people from different demographics to attend a function about violence against women and girls, and they are faced with non-physical violence. So that's what needs to be addressed.
In an unusual move for the palace, the issue was addressed. Susan Hussey resigned, the palace apologised, and organised a meeting between the two women to resolve the row. Buckingham Palace then released a statement saying, "At this meeting, filled with warmth and understanding, Lady Susan offered her sincere apologies for the comments that were made and the distress they caused to Miss Fulani. Lady Susan has pledged to deepen her awareness of the sensitivities involved and is grateful for the opportunity to learn more about the issues in this area." Sadly, reports of such warmth and understanding have not appeared between the sovereign and the Sussexes, with neither party seeming to engage in the same problem-solving spirit. It could perhaps have been due to Missile Number 2, Prince Harry's explosive memoir Spare, and various television interviews surrounding its publication. In the ghost-written account, Harry alleged that William had physically attacked him, that the brothers had begged their father not to marry Camilla, and that his stepmother was embroiled in a dangerous deal with the British press to rehabilitate her public image at the expense of other royals. At the time of publication in January, there was, as ever, no royal response. In fact, contact between the family was minimal, and as preparations continued for the upcoming coronation, questions swirled as to whether the king's second son would even attend. Harry himself said relations would need to improve if he were to do so.
There's a lot that can happen between now and then. But, the door is always open. The ball is in their court. There's a lot to be discussed, and I really hope that they are willing to sit down and talk about it.
It's unclear whether they did indeed sit down and talk about it, but come April, something did seem to have shifted. The palace released a statement which read, "Buckingham Palace is pleased to confirm that the Duke of Sussex will attend the coronation service at Westminster Abbey on the 6th of May. The Duchess of Sussex will remain in California with Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet." It was by no means a sign of full reconciliation. The rift was still very much alive, and indeed the presence of Harry may have been cause for concern for those whose alleged misdemeanours he so publicly laid bare. Harry found himself sat 2 rows behind his brother during the service, and while the heir travelled back to the palace in the Diamond Jubilee state coach, the spare made a swift exit by car. But for all of the fallout, Harry's presence was a move that kept the door, even just ever so slightly, open for possible future peacemaking, and would no doubt have been of comfort to the king to have both his sons by his side for his life-defining date with destiny. The crowning glory of his first year on the throne and the defining moment of his lifetime. Here is a closer look at that most special day. It was a day for the history books. Charles had already been king for 8 months, but this was the moment he and the world had been waiting for. An ancient ceremony that has been held in Westminster Abbey for the last 9 centuries. The crowning of a sovereign is a rich tapestry of military displays, religious significance, and sacred oaths. The coronation of King Charles III was no different, but many aspects of this great state occasion were decidedly personal, offering an insight into the man behind the monarch and where he might be taking the crown. The king was crowned alongside his wife on Saturday the 6th of May 2023, in a dazzling spectacle of pomp, pageantry and people. 2,000 invited guests filled the Abbey, thousands of spectators lined the streets outside, and hundreds of millions tuned in around the world to watch this rare phenomenon. The day began with the arrival of more than 5,000 members of the armed forces who travelled by train to take part in the processions. By 7 a.m, the Abbey doors were open and it was shortly jam-packed with the great and good of Britain and beyond. Those with the golden ticket included foreign royals, world leaders, political powerhouses, greats of the stage and screen, religious representatives, and charity champions. The King and Queen made their way to the ceremony in the Diamond Jubilee state coach, accompanied by a splendid household cavalry march. The impressive military procession lasted 1.42 miles, and at the end of it, Charles emerged as we had never seen him before. Clad in opulent coronation robes, their majesties processed through the Abbey. We saw Prince George carry out his ceremonial duty of page of honour to his grandfather, and the Queen was also attended by her grandchildren. The air of antiquity was potent as the traditional vivat acclamations reverberated around the ancient walls, the Latin words translating to "Long live Queen Camilla" and "Long live King Charles." Throughout, deference was met with humility.
As children of the kingdom of God, we welcome you in the name of the King of Kings.
In his name and after his example, I come not to be served, but to serve.
And solemn promises brought to light the deep sense of duty and service.
Will you solemnly promise and swear to govern the peoples of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, your other realms and the territories to any of them belonging or pertaining, according to their respective laws and customs?
I solemnly promise so to do.
And then the most sacred part, hidden from view, Charles, divested of his robes, was anointed with holy oil by the Archbishop of Canterbury. Behind the screen, a moment of quiet between King and God. Next, the king took to the 700-year-old coronation chair upon the ancient stone of destiny, where he was presented with orb, sceptre, and then crown. St. Edward's crown was placed on his head, the one and only time he'll wear it in his lifetime.
Life and limb.
Prince William paid
So help me
homage
God.
to his father, the king, pledging his loyalty with a kiss on the cheek, as members of the congregation and public were invited to also swear their allegiance. And for the first time since 1937, a queen consort was crowned too, something Camilla must have once thought an impossibility. God Save the King rang out, and His Majesty wore the magnificent imperial state crown as he and his queen stepped out of the abbey and into their new life. The afternoon continued much in the same celebratory vein. The gold state coach sailed back to Buckingham Palace among a sea of soldiers in the biggest military show since 1953. The rain couldn't dampen the spirits of the jubilant onlookers, thrilled to catch a glimpse of the king, or even better, mischievous Prince Louis up to his usual tricks. A royal salute from his armed forces.
3 cheers for His Majesty, the King, and Her Majesty, the Queen! Hip hip! Hip hip! Hip hip!
A fly past from the Red Arrows, and an outpouring from the thousands who braved the British weather to witness this moment of history. In July, the coronation was officially celebrated in Scotland with a service of thanksgiving at St Giles's Cathedral, complete with procession and flypast. But this celebration, Coronation Day itself, and several other days in the King's short reign were not solely displays of undiluted adulation. While many who have been present at a royal event or engagement have revelled in the pomp and pageantry, others have seized the opportunity to voice their opposition to the king and what he stands for. Banners and chants of "Not My King" have been frequent accessories to royal events over the past year. But one anti-royal protester chose to take a more extreme course of action. Patrick Thelwell, a 23-year-old university student, threw not 1, not 2, but 4 eggs at the king during a visit to York. The monarch attempted to ignore the onslaught while his security team sprung to action, and the visit, which was to unveil a statue of the late Queen at York Minster, went ahead unaffected. Thelwell, who was swiftly arrested, told police the king deserved the egging, describing it as the only justice the victims of colonialism will ever get. He was subsequently found guilty of threatening behaviour and handed a 12-month community order with 100 hours of unpaid work. After his day in court, Thelwell stood by his actions.
I think the judge focused on the specifics of the case, which is like, did I throw an egg or not? And I never denied that I did. But, you know, at the same time, I also didn't apologise for it.
In the months since the eggy escapade, it appears the country isn't quite ready for any major change just yet. Polling by YouGov suggests 62% of Brits believe the UK should continue having a monarchy, compared to 26% with the opposite view, largely on par with opinion polls over the last 10 years. So, while the fate of a monarchy is never certain, there doesn't seem to be an immediate threat to its existence on these shores. But as the reign of King Charles III reaches its first anniversary, what has it told us about the new Carolean era? To an extent, an old adage springs to mind. The more things change, the more they stay the same. The death of Queen Elizabeth II and the accession of King Charles III epitomised Britain's ability to keep calm and carry on. In the face of losing a constitutional titan, the country was driven by the slow march of rituals carried out centuries over. A prince became king as night follows day. But not quite everything has stayed the same. Beyond his palace walls, this king reigns over a changed world, and that handover of power made space for different visions for Britain to emerge. The age of deference and mystique is all but gone, replaced with demands for scrutiny and transparency at home, and serious questions overseas about the monarchy's place in the realms and Commonwealth. Charles appears at least open to this new order, going so far as to support a study into his family's links with slavery. And perhaps he has no choice. The late Queen's ability to modernise just enough while remaining a cultural constant proved integral to the success of her time on the throne and the preservation of her family's institution. Now, a year into his reign, her son, King Charles III, has embarked on that delicate tightrope walk. And with the eyes of history upon him, the future of the monarchy will depend on every step.